This weekend the presidential elections are taking place in Russia. The head of state is kind of expected, both by the people and by himself, to remain head of state until he dies. Now, that didn't change during the Soviet period. Lenin, Stalin, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, they all stayed as president until they died, or first secretary as it was called. Whether your name is King Charles or King Vladimir, then that's how it's likely to be. I think a lot of people in the West just automatically assume that any elections in Russia would always be rigged. But actually that's not the case. For starters, they don't even need to be. In Russia, the incumbent president would always be likely to win because firstly, it's in the Russian mentality to kind of, stick with what you know. The Russians aren't impulsive, risky people, and it's often a case of, better the devil you know than risk someone else. And secondly, Russia, like so many countries in the world, the media is obviously state controlled, which means that obviously the incumbent president is always going to have an advantage in that situation as well. It might be surprising for a lot of people in the West, but President Putin here is very popular. People do vote for him. I know that for a fact because over the years there are people who even told me they vote for him. He does have grassroots support, and so effectively he does get the most votes each time. I think that's one of the reasons the West has always had it in for Vladimir Putin, always, even way before the current problems. I think it's because the Western leaders have always been very envious of his popularity. In the West, nobody seems to like their leader, do they? No one loves their leader, no one supports their leader. But in Russia, the leader does get support. The people do like their leader. People do sometimes wear T-shirts with slogans and pictures of the president, or have a mug or a calendar. Whereas in Western countries that never happens. And I think that peeves a lot of Western politicians, that they're disliked by their population, whereas Vladimir Putin, by a large percentage of his population, is actually liked and revered. Having said that, I do think he's lost some support in the past couple of years, what with all the stuff that's been going on. But, if he had 80% support before, and now he's only got, say, 60%, well then that's still enough to win the elections each time, isn't it? I tell you something, one thing I like about living in Russia is how low-key the presidential elections are. You wouldn't even really know there's elections taking place this weekend. It's not such a huge deal. It's not over the top like it is elsewhere. I remember when I was in Georgia, my goodness, there's just big posters of the two leading candidates everywhere, in every town, every city. It was just so invasive. I know I was waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, having nightmares about one of the big bald heads that kept facing me everywhere I went. And I thought, I much prefer Georgia before Georgia went all sort of, democratic. The same when I was in the United States once. I was there like months before the presidential election. But even months and months before, there was saturated coverage every day. It was so jarring just for me, and I was only a short-term visitor. I felt really sorry for people that have to live in the United States and put up with that nonsense every day, non-stop, for months and months before any presidential election. One reason why you don't really notice that it's elections taking place is because it's not like in some places where there's not that many places where you can vote and you just get large queues of people and things like that. Here, crikey, there's so many places you can vote. Every school and college and library and so many other places turn into voting stations. So it just means it's quick and easy for everyone to vote. You don't have to queue or anything like that. And the college that's just over my shoulder there, that's the place where you can vote today as well. What's very interesting, what might surprise you, is that I've not seen any adverts or posters or anything with the president on at all. In some of the regions I've been to recently, I've seen posters and slogans supporting the president, but just in words. So it seems Perm City and Perm Region shall be supporting the incumbent president. haven't anywhere seen any pictures or photos of the president. I've seen some posters of some of the other parties, but I guess the problem with Russia is there's not really any other suitable options really. I think some of the other parties are maybe too extreme, and then other parties are just outdated. I guess, like the Communist Party, they're still ploughing along, but realistically, I mean, they sort of had their chance, I guess, didn't they? And it didn't work, so I don't think anyone's taking them seriously. So all things considered, my sneaky tip for who will be the next president of Russia will be the incumbent president. It's just a feeling I get. I might be wrong. Actually, it's not a surprise that perhaps many people don't want to run for presidency. For the 4 people that are running on the information boards, it's got all their personal information, things like their salary and the car they drive and how much money they've got in their bank accounts and all things like that. So I guess a lot of people perhaps, wouldn't want all their personal information being shared with the whole population. So Russia does have its own kind of democratic system. It's a bit different from the Western democratic system, but to be honest, I don't really think that would work here in Russia anyway. Russia being such a big and difficult place to govern, I think Western democracy wouldn't work here, so there's no point trying to apply Western principles. People are voting though, and as an incentive for people to vote, quite a few of the regions, including my region, Sverdlovskaya region, they're offering voters a chance to partake in a draw to win an apartment and cars and telephones and all things like that. So I guess it's kind of, it makes sense in a way. If you want people to vote, encourage people to vote by offering them some nice prizes. The Russian system certainly has some advantages over the Western system. For example, at the moment, I know lots of people in Britain aren't particularly happy that, British prime ministers, people who are running the country, have not been democratically elected. And also another problem in Britain, you've got the 2 main parties, just like in America, you've got the 2 main parties, and a lot of people only vote for their party, even if the other party might have better ideas or the other party might have a better potential candidate for presidency. If you're a staunch conservative, then you won't vote for Labour no matter what, and vice versa. So that's obviously to the detriment of the country, whereas Russia doesn't have this problem. Russia, the president is focused just on the well-being of Russia, on the country, whereas in the democratic countries they know that they might get voted out of office in 4 or 5 years' time, so they only care about the short term because they don't want to invest in the country's long term at all, because they think that another party could be in power by then and then they'll get the credit for it. So everyone's only thinking about themselves and the short term instead of the long-term benefits of the country. Whereas the advantage of Russia is that it's got stability, and one person tends to run Russia for a long time, and thus they have experience and know-how, and at the country's best interests at heart as well. Also, what's interesting is that most people in the West only seem to agree with Western democracy if it's the person they voted for who wins. If the other person wins, then people turn out in their tens or hundreds of thousands, like we saw in the United States when Trump won, and all of a sudden, people, because their man didn't win, all of a sudden don't believe in the system anymore. So the theatre there, with the rather cool mosaic on the side of it, that's also a place where you can vote. You see, even when I'm doing a video about something like voting, I can still find a way of getting a Soviet mosaic into it. Okay folks, that's about it then, I guess. I hope you learned something interesting there at least. Bye for now, catch you next time.